Hi, my friends. Today's topic is the subject of giftedness. And giftedness is, here in the US, is the term that we use for people who are higher intelligence. Usually children are noticed as gifted. We have programs called like Gifted and Talented. The word gifted is problematic. Many people will say all people have gifts, and I agree with that, but it is the term that we have. And so I want to use that term so that people who are dealing with giftedness are able to get to the right information. Okay, so why consider giftedness? So the argument is that all ends of the intellectual spectrum, if we look at it on a bell curve, we have the higher intelligence on one end and the lower intelligence on another end, and then we have sort of the standard deviation, right? Like normal intelligence. And nobody would disagree that somebody who has a lower intelligence, especially like two standard deviations down, or two standard deviations, lower than the sort of norm, need extra support. And there's been culturally a bent towards they'll be fine. They're smart. They'll be fine on the other end of the intellectual spectrum, and that's problematic because actually there are unique needs for that population, and when people get stuck on the idea of they're smart, they'll be fine, they're not attending to the unique needs. And also, well, we'll get into parenting gifted kids in a little bit, but that's a lonely journey for a lot of people. So why do we want to consider it? If you're not already parenting a gifted child or know somebody or yourself are on the higher end, like one deviation, two standard deviations out from the norm, there may be some things that you would appreciate knowing about yourself or about your child or somebody that you love. And it is not true when people say they're smart, they'll be fine. Smart doesn't lead to fine. Maybe you can learn different ways to deal with things because you have some intellectual ability that's beyond your peers, but I wouldn't say that's a one for one. That's not an automatic. And the parenting in this is, like I said, pretty lonely, and you have a lot of work to do if you're parenting a gifted child. My research is primarily from James Webb's books. He is the founder of the Social and Emotional Needs of Children, of Gifted Children, and has done a ton of research, not to be mixed up with the James Webb that is now all over because of the videos we're getting coming back from the James Webb telescope. This is another James Webb, also a brilliant person, that I had the good fortune to go to one of his lectures a number of years ago, and I write about it in a blog post where really I think it altered my experience of parenting when I was really hunting for what is wrong with this child and having a hard time with it. And as a parent of a gifted kid, it was quite a journey. And that was early on in my graduate degree program that I went to that lecture. And so finishing out my grad program and the early start of my clinical practice, my internship, was focused a lot on the area of giftedness. There are a lot of other great authors. I'll share with you some other books. But my sort of the Bible for parenting gifted kids is this book by James Webb. So let's see if we can advance the slide here. So one of the reasons why I'm bringing it up, actually the main reason why I'm bringing it up here, not to just talk about my own experience, is to kind of redirect why is it important to consider giftedness, because there are clinical issues that are higher with this population. And the clinical issues include the parenting clinical issues. So if you think about the experience of parenting, a lot of our ways that we relate to one another as parents is like, oh, I'm so exhausted, baby won't sleep through the night, I have to get a math tutor, I'm not sure if my kid's ready for school. Like, it's a lot of the like, or behaviorally, like I'm having this much problem. It's the difficulty of things that sort of bond parents together. And while there is difficulty with parenting gifted kids, the way that it's heard sometimes by hopefully well-meaning friends is, poor me, I have such a smart child. And that is not how we bond as parents in at least in my community here in California. So first and foremost, for parents of gifted children, grandparents, and people who love gifted children, and teachers, well, not so much teachers, but caregivers and people who love them, is it can be very isolating. You don't necessarily feel like the right kind of member of the parenting club. And that isolation is not good, especially when there's a lot of stress in the parenting of that child. And then, of course, we have sibling issues on top of that, and differences among the sibs, and it just becomes very, very difficult. I've had the good fortune of running what are called SANG model parent groups, which are gatherings of people who are parenting gifted children, and we use this content and James Webb's book. And our first session always includes like people sharing their experience of parenting a gifted child. And to watch somebody share a story and then have anybody else in the room like nodding in agreement, or like, oh, you have that problem too. It's sometimes the first time a parent has connected with anybody else in the gifted community. It's a lifeline. It is a powerful experience. When I run those, I let that session run long so that everybody can feel connected before we get into sort of the content. So just know that as I present that same material here, there's Willow saying hey for you. As I present that material here, I'm wishing for you that you experience a degree of connection with the community of other parents of gifted children. I got a noisy little puppy back there behind the screen. She's excited. I don't know what to say. Okay, so what are the clinical issues that we see with gifted children and their families beyond this isolation with the parents? We're dealing with issues of intensity, perfectionism, and stress. And the stress and perfectionism are usually internal. Not always, but they're often an internal driver in the kiddo. And then that kiddo is sometimes very young and they don't know what to do with that. Sometimes it's put upon them by the parents, but in my experience, mostly it's an internal drive, and it is intense. And we're going to talk about Dabrowski's overexcitabilities, and that's going to explain some of the intensity. So right off the bat, that's what we've got coming in, like, oh, my kid is like so intense, or they're struggling with intensity. They're struggling with perfectionism. They are not satisfied if they're not getting an A+ on everything that they do in their AP history class, or just like high levels of stress that are starting to affect them physiologically. Like you'll see a lot of like biting and like chewing on things and just doing all kinds of things physically to try to regulate their little systems. So that shows up in the clinic. And then high degrees of anxiety and anxiety disorders, a high level of depression and existential depression. So because these little kiddos can think broader and bigger, they see the broader and bigger things, and that can manifest in existential depression, which I don't know any clinicians that treat for that, but it's a common occurrence among depressed kiddos. And it's hard to empathize with that, because you're like, why are you worrying about these things? Like, just be a child, which is a minimizing. If you're paying attention to attachment, that's a minimizing or a dismissing attachment style that would say, like, why are you making a big deal about that? Like, just get over that. I had when I was teaching one of these SANG groups, sometimes people will come up, to the teacher after a particular session and just share. And I had one guy come up and say from his home, I give homework in those classes. after he did his homework while he was reading the book, James Webb's book, um, he recognized so much of himself, especially around the existential depression. And this man was like, I think he was an older parent of a kiddo in that school district where I was teaching, or may have been a grandfather. I think he was an older parent. So the guy was probably like, I mean, that's not old, I'm 50, but he was like 50. And he remembered feeling an existential angst as a young child, so much so that like he couldn't enjoy Christmas because he was aware of what was happening in the world. And that's a sign that this was a child. As a child, he was a gifted child with some the tree didn't fall far. Then he was raising a gifted child. So existential depression is something that there is a book on that. If you're running into that, do a Google search or look on Amazon for a book about existential depression. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. I'll try to do another video about it. I have it. I just don't have it right in front of me. Okay, also with this population, we find a high in a clinical sense, what they're coming into counseling for, a lot of trouble with relationships, trouble relating with peers, because who do you match with? Like your age peer or your intellectual peer? Or when we get into asynchronous development, we've got an emotional peer, which is often quite younger. So we're not connecting with anybody our age. We're too young to interact with the people where we're intellectually matched, and we are wanting to connect with young children because our social and emotional maturation is asynchronous. It's lower, and then lots of trouble with parents, especially parents who didn't have an empathetic experience of their own giftedness, or are just like highly stressed and don't know what to do with this kiddo, because sometimes it's high maintenance parenting. So that's what brings people into counseling. I like to think about with our gifted kids, and really any kind of issue characteristic. I love this idea of a curly hair analogy. So I have curly hair. I have curly hair. I can straighten it, but it's gonna be curly. And it just is. It's not bad. I mean, I may not like to style it. I may wish for straight hair, but it's not a bad characteristic, right? It's just, it is curly or it is not curly. There's no value placed on the goodness or badness of it. And so same with characteristics of gifted kids. I'm going to get into the characteristics, and then I'm going to talk about Dabrowski's overexcitabilities. And all of these just are. And so the sooner we can understand what they are and maybe label it a little bit, then we're dealing with what is, instead of being disappointed that the hair is curly and not straight. I don't know. Tell me if that analogy works. I've used it for years, but I'm not really sure it does work. Okay, so what are the characteristics of a gifted child? This is, again, comes from Dr. Webb's book. Okay, so capable of complex thinking at usually a young age, and so they'll do really well as they mature, going into like they'll do like in middle school. A gifted child is going to be doing more depth, hopefully not just more work because they're gifted, but more depth. When they get into high school, they may not feel satisfied in like a regular English class. They may need to be in an AP class because it exercises the natural complex thinking that comes with these kiddos. And the complexity starts early. So one of my kiddos is, we never had her tested, so I don't know if she's gifted or not, but certainly high intelligence. And the example I give of what complex thinking looks like in maybe a high capability, high intelligence, not, I don't know, giftedness or not, with that one, she would make a really good like generalization earlier. I don't know, maybe I'm just a mom thinking that my kid is spectacular, and she is, but she would make this leap. So the example was, so little, so 3, when are you eating Cheerios and raisins? Because that's where the story begins, is Cheerios and raisins. I want to say like 2, maybe 2 or 3. And we had made the mix of like, how about okay, so snack time, right? What are we going to take for snacks in the car? I want Cheerios. I want raisins. Okay. How about we put those in a bag together? So my daughter loved that. We put the Cheerios and raisins in a bag together, and that became her own sense of an analogy. And she began to use that for all of the things that she wanted to do together. Let's put it in a bag together was the phrase that she used to use. It was the cutest thing. I wish I had it on video because here I am 24 years later and I don't have it anymore. So it would be like, okay, so we have this set of grandparents on this side and this set of grandparents on this side. And we're going to spend this Christmas day with this set and this day after Christmas with this set. And from an early age, she was saying things like, why don't we just have them in a bag together? So I think that's an example of a very young child kind of grasping at the complex thinking, like, good job. That's some good thinking. Concern with social or political problems or injustice. Again, that goes to some of that existential. Oh, Willow's got something to say about existential depression, apparently. So those are the things that, because there is a concern with how the rest of the world is, sometimes there's some existential depression as a follow-on to that. Okay, I'm going to come back in just a sec. Okay, I'm back. A little bit of an ordeal to get Willow in and out, just because, as I think most of you know, I'm dealing with pretty major physical limitation, and where my recording is upstairs, and then I gotta go down the stairs and through the kitchen and out the back door, and then at the back door there's the other dog, and they're still trying to sort out their pack issues. So anyway, if I'm out of breath, that's why. Okay, so other characteristics, continuing on our list of characteristics of gifted children. High sensitivity, and this has to do with emotional sensitivity or physical sensitivity. So one of the characteristics, or one of the ways that like physical sensitivity shows up is like, like the tags in the back of their shirt. I mean, this isn't just a list of characteristics of gifted children. There are other things that have that issue, but taken together, you might consider that you've got a giftedness situation going on. Like I've considered the characteristics, like if you have a couple of these or a multitude of these, you might be parenting a gifted child. Usually, and then of course there's testing. Here in California, they test like second grade about like intellectual ability, which we can talk about the different types of intelligence and that kind of thing. But so thinking about like so sensitivity, the tags in the back of a shirt or like the seams on the sock, the feeling of like, I love sand tray, and some gifted kids can't stand the feel of sand on their fingers. Now, when I say sensitive, I mean like through an electron microscope sensitivity and intensity. Okay, so it's not mild, like that's kind of irritating me. I can't focus on anything else, and it's so upsetting that I'm irritable and like lacking ability to cope. It's like big intensity and sensitivity. And then we'll talk about Dabrowski's overexcitabilities, and we're going to talk more about that experience of intensity. So that's inside. Now, some kids may not show it, but it's pretty intense inside in the physiology. And then we might see daydreaming and asynchronous development. So let me tell you about asynchronous development. It's a key word in the gifted, like clinically dealing with giftedness, but also think as a parent, setting expectation, because it's a little counterintuitive. So what asynchronous development is about is that like we grow on our social skill set, our emotional skill set, and our intellectual skill set usually line up. So people of average intelligence, high intelligence, low intelligence, those three areas are going to be developing at the same rate, synchronous. my social and emotional and my intellectual capabilities all growing in this synchronous fashion, including intellectually disabled, very, very, very low, is still developing in a synchronous way. The only group that doesn't have synchronous development is high intelligence people. Like 2 deviations, not high achieving, not high capability, not high intellect, but like 2 deviations out, standard deviations out and higher. What you'll see is far exceeding the intellectual, but then, okay, so here's an example. It wouldn't be unusual to have like an 8-year-old intelligent, gifted child who, okay, so age-wise, they're 8. Intellectually and like academically, they could be studying college courses, okay? And when they're emotionally distressed, tantrum like a 3-year-old. That would be a very common profile. So that's what asynchronous development looks like. Not all, but it is a common characteristic in this population. Okay, and then a passionate imagination and creativity, again, goes with that intensity. A remarkable sense of humor, lots of good humor in this population, sometimes about really weird, quirky stuff, but they're enjoying that humor. A desire for reason and understanding, so sort of a quest to figure things out, more than the sort of average, like, why is the sky blue kind of thing, but like, you know, principles of physics, or why the world operates this way, or relationship things, like why is it this way, lots of like seeking, searching, being impatient with themselves or with other people. That's part of why we have so much trouble with peer relationships, because these kids are sometimes not patient at all with their little friends, and then they're not very fun to play with. And then they can have a long attention span. Now, sometimes we have like ADHD characteristics in there as well. And so, you know, you're going to see a mix of hyperfocus and then very short attention span. So like I said, these are not like you have all of these things if you are a gifted child. They're just common characteristics. Again, you want to know what you've got. Like if you've got curly hair, you've got curly hair. You need to know that if you're going to go to Hawaii, your hair is going to be frizzy. You need to know that if you are parenting a child who is trying to understand the way the world works, you're going to need to come with some special patience to help them do that research, because you may not know all the things they think you should know. Okay, so I wanted to give you this term of Dabrowski's overexcitabilities. Don't love that term either. But one way to think about it is just a heightened response to stimuli. So again, the makeup of many of these gifted children is just like an intensity inside of them. And Dabrowski, so this is old research that Dr. Webb is citing in his book, observed in this collection of gifted children that they are particularly prone to a heightened response. And because it was Dabrowski that did that research, they're called the overexcitabilities. That gets a little mixed up with ADHD terminology, so don't get hung up on that, but you should know Dabrowski if you're parenting a gifted child. And these come in, this is the last little bit I'm going to cover, and then I'm going to show you a video and break that down for you. So I think it'll highlight one of these really well for you. And then we'll be done with this one. But I have more. I have lots of content on giftedness. So if you want more, I will record more. Even if you don't want more, I'll probably record more. But I hope you want more. Okay, so what Dabrowski observed is that we could have a heightened response to stimuli in these areas. Intellectual, sensual, and this isn't like sexy, sensual. This is, again, just our sensory system. So a lot of times kids with sensory processing issues, like sensory seeking or sensory avoidant, that could be comorbid with a giftedness. That could be right in there with that. Psychomotor, which has to do with your physicality and the way, people who are really gifted on like, oh gosh, who's somebody who probably, like Simone Biles. This is probably a gifted, somebody with a psychomotor giftedness, or like maybe Michael Phelps, somebody who's like exceptionally gifted in their physical attributes. And then imaginational, so the people who get way lost in their experience are all the way in on it. And then emotional. And the video I want to show you has to do with that fourth one, imaginational. And we're going to talk about Robin Williams. Now, at the time I started using this clip with Robin Williams in it, Robin Williams was still with us. And when he passed away, I really gave some thought to whether I should include him in my gifted education classes in the future. And I decided that I should. And part of that has to do with kind of the way that he died, which I think is probably a direct result of sort of the existential side of things and his giftedness. The gift that he gave all of us was his imaginational overexcitability. And so I'm going to show you his clip from inside the actor's studio, just so that you can see how much what we want to focus on is how much he's so into his imaginational experience. That's all he sees around him. So I'm going to break it down as we go through it.